We want to end actually on a segment that just happened with Sean Hannity and Vivek Ramaswamy on a more serious note, because there's a lot going on here in terms of what Vivek has said so far, which has pissed off Republican elites the most. And it appears to be his declaration that we will treat Israel like every other country by normalizing foreign aid to them. Hannity, in particular, incensed by this idea. Let's take a listen.
You know, you said aid to Israel, our number one ally, only democracy in the region, should end in 2028, and that they should be integrated with their neighbors. That was the exact quote. You want me to read it?
That's actually, yeah, I can tell you the exact quote. What I said is it would be a mark of success if we ever got to a point in our relationship with Israel, if Israel never needed the United States' aid. And Sean, you know how politics is played. A lot of the other professional politicians who have been threatened by my rise have used that statement to say that I would cut off aid to Israel. That's not correct. I've been crystal clear.
But do you,
the only condition under which...
Do you understand the importance of the strategic alliance, the intelligence sharing, in an area of the world where we have a lot of enemies, which, by the way, boggles my mind that we look for the lifeblood of our economy and the world's economy from that very same region of the world. We have more natural resources here, which you agree. But you do understand how important that alliance is, and how important the intelligence factor is, and how important it is with Iran, especially seeking nukes.
I understand it, I think, more deeply than probably anybody in this race. I've traveled to Israel. I have business partners in Israel. The reality is this. By the end of my first term, our relationship with Israel will be stronger than it ever has been, because I will treat it as a true friendship, not just a transactional relationship.
And why did you say that they should have preferential treatment? Why did you say that Israel should not have preferential treatment from us? That's a direct quote.
Sean, I understand. No, those are direct quotes from headlines summarized by opposition research fed to the fake news media. The reality is, here's what I've said is Abraham Accords 2.0 is my top priority. Abraham Accords 2.0 is my top priority, which is to get Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar into that pact with Israel. And foremost, to have a partnership with Israel that does something really important for the U.S., which is to make sure that Iran never, ever, ever has nuclear capabilities. That's important to the United States. And the other thing I've said, Sean, is that Israel's our friend. Good friends learn from each other. I would love Israel's border policies in this country. I would love Israel's tough on crime policies and strong national identity in this country.
Well, I don't know. What did you make of that? I just think the level of hatred that he appears to garner for just saying we will treat Israel like like any other country with our foreign aid, and that it's I mean, I don't know why it's not desirable to have to not give Israel foreign aid anymore, or any other country really, for that matter. I mean, I've been there. It's a very developed tech-based economy. They're making a hell of a lot of money. The last time I checked, you know, we'll go over there. In many respects, their own military capabilities, they laugh at us because they think we're far behind the times. I mean, listen, you take anybody's money if they're going to give it to you. But this has like struck the third rail for Nikki Haley and for Sean Hannity seemingly here. And it like blows their mind, the idea that we would treat them the same way that we treat everybody. And it's just funny because even if you look and you go back at what he said previously, he was like, yeah, I guess we should just normalize it the way that we have our relations with Egypt. You're like, what? Like, why is this so objectionable to so many of these GOP elites?
So let me read you exactly one of the quotes on Israel that they're referring to there. What he originally said is, if we're successful, the true mark of success for the U.S. and for Israel will be to get to a 2028 where Israel is so strongly standing on its own 2 feet, integrated into the economic and security infrastructure of the rest of the Middle East, that it will not require and be dependent on that same level of historical aid or commitment from the U.S. So that's what he said. I think there's a lot that's interesting about this exchange.
I don't see anything wrong with that.
Number one, what's interesting about this exchange is, of all the things that Vivek has said that you could object to, like invading Mexico, like disenfranchising young voters, like basically like watching the world burn, like this deeply regressive flat tax and dismantling all of these like federal agencies that we actually kind of need. Of all the things that you could take issue with, it's him sort of suggesting maybe we adjust our relationship with Israel that they go all in on. Okay, so that's revealing. Equally revealing, I think, is that Vivek is very politician-y and very squishy and very, like, sort of trying to spin on this particular issue. If you think back to the debate, how many places where, you know, everybody else was trying to dodge the question on climate change, and he's happy to jump in there and be like, the climate change agenda is a hoax. He's happy to jump in there and be super crystal clear on what he thinks about Ukraine. But on this issue, even during the debate, when Nikki got him on this issue, part of why she actually, you know, even though I think her neocon worldview, as I explained in detail, is porn, et cetera, part of why she got him on this particular issue is because suddenly he becomes very weaselly and very like, let me explain and let me change what I actually said and let me reframe it and rephrase it, et cetera. So even he feels very tepid and skittish about what he previously said on Israel. I mean, this is such a third rail that if you say anything different than the 100% consensus, there is such a freak out, especially in the Republican Party. But I mean, we've seen it in the Democratic Party as well, where there's this whole organized effort to quash any sort of dissent on the status quo of our, you know, aid towards Israel.
And the funny thing is, if you put that quote to a Republican voter, they'd be like, all right, yeah, whatever. You know, it's be one of those. I mean, look, a lot of Republicans have they have a lot of deep affection for Israel. They have not like a rosy view of the country, whatever. Okay, but the point though is that if you were to say, oh, let's just treat we should get to a point where they're independent of us. How can you possibly object to that? I mean, that's a long-standing point of foreign aid in many of these respects. It's one of those where it's like, it makes such transparent sense, especially if that's something that you're trying to pursue. And if you listen to what he's talking about, he's like, yeah, I want to normalize relations between all the countries so they can just live like that and we don't have to be involved anymore. I mean, what are we objecting to here? Like, what is the dissent from that? That we should just give somebody money regardless of whether they want it or need it or not? That doesn't, it's just, it boggles the mind. But now the reason why I think he's defensive is, let's all be real here. The billionaire donors and all those other people, Vivek can say he's free of them. I think he's probably freer of them than most.
Just because of his own personal wealth.
Because of his own personal wealth.
Yeah.
But, you know, you can't be run, if let's say in this scenario where he is the nominee, you can't run without him. You know, you're going to need their super PAC money. You're going to need you can't, all the money in the world can't buy you as much as you're going to need in order to run. And he's afraid. I also think that whenever it comes to conservative media, this is the one area where I see them attacking him 100%. Fox News, obviously with Sean Hannity, with many of the other outlets of which he relies on to really get some earned media in order to pump, you know, in order to pump like info to the GOP base. This is one where they're taking the most issue, sometimes because they also take money from donors who are obsessed with Israel. So it actually reveals, I think, a lot about the subject.
Yeah, it also reveals a lot about, you know, Fox News doesn't want Rupert Murdoch, let's be clear, because plenty of the hosts still love Trump and, you know, are very sycophantic and all of that stuff because they see where their bread is buttered in terms of what their audience wants to hear. But Rupert Murdoch wants to move on from Trump. He tried with Ron DeSantis, hasn't really worked out. They sort of pseudo-floated Tim Scott, put on a little Tim Scott trial balloon. That hasn't really taken off. The new flavor of the moment is Nikki Haley. And so I'm just thinking back to when they did their, like, they invented out of whole cloth these quote unquote power rankings and like just randomly put Tim Scott in the top 3 alongside DeSantis and Trump in these power rankings based on literally nothing. And obviously, you know, the person that you would actually put in the top 3 based on his online support, based on his polling, based on his fundraising, et cetera, would be Vivek. So that was immediately a signal to me of like, oh, they don't want this guy whatsoever. And this is another sign of, you know, Sean Hannity was really confrontational with him from the start of this interview on the issue of Israel. They clearly, you know, they don't see him as an acceptable second choice Trump alternative, et cetera. And, you know, I think Vivek, if you just look at his proposals, I think they would largely be really good for, you know, status quo of America. I think they'd be largely very good for the wealthy, et cetera. But I do think they feel that they have less control over him. And so that's probably why they're so viciously going after him and trying to make sure that he's not acceptable as the Trump number 2 alternative.
There's no question about that whatsoever.
Yeah.
In terms of, and it's even rhetorically, the reason why they got to quash this and crush it in his tracks, because you can't be allowing any of this. The only person who could ever actually say this is Trump and get away with it. And even with Trump, he never did that whenever it came to
That's
Israel.
true. This is the one issue where he never crossed orthodoxy, even a little. He did everything they wanted him to do on Israel.
Absolutely.
So. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.